All right, today we're going to put these Viking shocks on the 2014 Teryx, replacing the stock Fox units. I've got a box here from Viking with 4 shocks, 4 springs, and some spanner wrenches. Here's one completed assembly. Suspension is completely stock except for a 2-inch bracket lift on the front, and it does have 400-pound spring rate springs in the back. All right, in the box it comes with 4 shocks, 4 shock bodies, and 4 springs, and 2 spanner wrenches. I noticed also that there's 2 different part numbers for the shocks, so I want to clarify which one's which. So the 209 is the front, the 211 is the rear, and you see the spring rates at the end. The 300s in the front, and the 350s are in the rear. You'll want to make sure that you match the part numbers. So for your front shocks, make sure you use the appropriate springs. In my case, the shocks on the front are these C209s, and the rears are C211s. And so for my front application, I'm using the 300-pound springs, and for the rear I have 350. The assembly of the shock is laid out like this, with all the parts in the correct order. I'll show you how it goes together. And the ridge goes on the up side of the unit. One thing you want to do is slide the rubber bump stop inside the spring. Spring to hold it center. Just like that. You can compress the spring or the shock to hold the unit back together. That's how they go together. You'll notice in the box that you've got a note here. You have to apply some anti-seize to the shock. The issue here is that over time, if you're going to ride it like many of us, you're going to get a lot of oil or mud and whatnot along these threads, and these nuts can adhere to the threads of the body, and the aluminum can basically do some corrosion right here, and then when you go to break it loose, you can damage the body. So what I'm using is this aluminum anti-seize, and this is something, you know, if you're in ATVs, you're going to have this for your axles when you put it into your differentials. With each shock, you're going to have a bearing assembly for the mounts. It's going to come together in a bag. It's going to have snap rings, the bearings, and the sleeves. All of these units are the same, with the exception of the sleeves. This is for the rear. This is for the front. Smaller bolt, larger bolt. You'll need a snap ring tool. Your snap rings, they go in. You put one ring in first, slide the bearing in. It goes in very easily, so it's not, you don't need to press for that. And then put your other bearing in on the other snap ring in on the other side. And then when you're ready to mount them in the bike, you'll slide your sleeve inside the bearing. first shock is off. I'm doing the driver's side front first. And I have the suspension at full droop without the shock being fully mounted yet. I only have the bolt in up at the top. At this point, you want to take a measurement from, in my case, I'm going to use limit straps from the lower shock mount to the upper shock mount at full droop. So now that it's sitting at this position, the tie rod is in a bind, that's what's holding it up. I'm going to measure that distance to that distance and then probably subtract a ½ inch to an inch for a safety measure. These shocks will extend beyond the reach of your suspension, so limit straps are required. Okay, I've got the bottom bolt secured. Don't forget to put the sleeves in the bearing to carry it through. So the next step is you need to pre-tension the spring, and to do that you're going to walk the nut down by hand until you get some engagement with the spring, and then go to about hand tight plus probably a full turn with your spanner wrench, and that's going to pre-tension the spring. And then when you lower the bike from that point, that will be the lowest ride height for the machine. Alright, working on the passenger side now. Same story as the other, but I wanted to point something out to you. With these Vikings, you get a sleeve right here in the bolts. This is the bearing assembly that we put together earlier. And when this fits into the A-arm mount, you get a lot more flexibility than you did with the Fox shocks. On that Fox shock, I should have shown you before I took it off. You try to lift this up, it's very stiff, and you put it in one position and it will practically hold itself there. But these, I'm fully torqued on the top, and this thing moves very, very easily and in several directions. So that alone is going to make a huge difference in the way this rides. On the top, on the fronts, I didn't have any issue with clearance. The shock body cleared the mount without any problem. However, in the rear, that's not the case. And I also have a gap that I have to make up here. So it looks like it's about ½ inch, and I probably will need some washers. I'm going to check that first. But you see here where the mount is making contact with the shock body. Same thing over here on this side. That right there. And it's not all the way down where it needs to be either. So it needs to go down quite a bit, but it's not going to because it's contacting the shoulder of the shock mount. So I'm going to turn it around and see how it works. Flipping these around, and they'll fit just fine. You can see I've been able to clear the mount altogether. The shock now is in its factory upright position with the adjustments at the bottom. However, what you'll notice now is I do have a clearance issue down here with the SATV arms. They do contact the shock body before I'm able to get the bolt through, so I'm going to have to do a little bit of grinding on these guys across the top just to clearance the shock. And I do have a gap, so you can see there it's about a ½ inch gap, I think. I'll measure it, but I'm going to go to this hardware store and get some washers. Here's the clearancing I had to do in the back. A little bit more than I wanted to take off, but it needs to be able to rotate up and not contact the shock. So that's how that turned out. And I actually had to grind just a bit off the back mount there, just for a little bit of clearance. And also you see the washers to take up that ½ inch of space up here at the top as well. Otherwise, aside from that motivation, they seem to come together pretty good.